Welcome to the Non-Standard Podcast. I'm your host, Manny Lampson. If this is your first time listening or your 50th time listening, this is what to expect on this episode. We dive into the concepts of developing your leadership toolbox. Why do you need this? You need this in any situation to help manage, lead, and control, and ultimately win. How do you do that? You can't use the same form of leadership in everything you do. So every episode, we dive into my leadership philosophy. We dive into the story and the background of the person we're talking to. And we also dive into some leadership traits I have accrued throughout the years. And then we also follow it up with a book review at the end. So you're getting a wide range of leadership topics and traits that you can add to your kit. So without further ado, let's go into the recap of this episode. And afterwards, if you love it, like it, share it, follow it, give us some feedback because we're only just getting started. All right, on today's episode, I'm joined with a fellow WSU Det 905 ROTC cadre member now, Dan Survival. And the reason I bring him onto the show is he was prior enlisted. He was a SERE guy just like me. He commissioned through OTS, so a little different of a route. We talk about that. He is now transitioning after being an RPA instructor, working his way up to that career, back into the AETC side, which is the training side for those who aren't familiar with it, in the Air Force to work as an ROTC cadre at Washington State University. So I invited him on. One, because he's going back to Pullman, where I want to go back and check it out. Two, he's a prior SERE guy. Three, he's a badass officer. And four, he's got some great stuff. Just to cover some of the things we talk about. We talk about SERE school. It's hard. It's difficult. It builds some badass leaders. We also talk about controlling your time, making decisions. Fortune favors the bold. His enlisted to officer route. Early success and stacking wins is a snowball effect. Boom. Go out and enjoy this episode and let me know if you have any questions. All right, we are ready to get this show on the road. Again, I'm Manny Lampson, your host of the Non-Standard Podcast, just like you heard, and I'm joined with fellow prior E badass, now future Coug, Dan, my man. So without further ado, for those listening, and you know, we always start with the 3 H's. I got the 3 H's from a good friend of mine who was on my first episode. When he was being interviewed for a job, the commander asked him the 3 H's: hometown, 2 heroes, and a hardship. Just get the juices going for him to get to know the other person. So I took that, added it to my leadership traits, and now I use that to start my podcast. So we'll get the juices going there. Dan, what do you got for your 3 H's?
Hey, thanks for having me on, Manny. Good to see you again. I know we haven't talked in person in probably 8 or 9 years. I think the last time I saw you was at Randolph, and I was carrying you and your who is that? Your instructor, your CISO instructor.
Oh yeah,
up to Chewy's to get some Mexican just randomly.
When you brought me for lunch that day, yep. I was just telling those guys about that at San Angelo that I met. That sort of knew you. I was telling them that random story about I was just texting people who's in this area, and you were there, and you took us to lunch, and that was a long time ago.
But anyway, good to see you again. Yeah, so 3 H's. Hometown, I've claimed many things at hometown in my days, but I was born in Maine, Biddeford, Maine, and grew up on a beach town called Old Orchard Beach, which is a really cool place. If somebody has ever been there, I'm sure they would back that up. But tiny little beach town, nice stretch of beach, very, very cold at all times of the year. Not a place you want to go jumping in and swimming for a prolonged period of time, but it takes you up the Maine coast. A nice stop on your way up to Acadia National Park, up a little bit more north. The entire coast of Maine is a beautiful place that I think is pretty unsung for a lot of people, because there's no reason to ever go up to Maine. Why would you go there? But I moved to Connecticut when I was young, 9, 10 years old. My dad took a new job, moved the whole family over there, and I lived in Hamden, Connecticut, which is right outside of New Haven, the pizza capital of the world, and spent my entire childhood there, up through high school, up through college. I went to school at Southern Connecticut State University before I enlisted into the Air Force. So Hamden, Connecticut is what I guess I would call home. I spent the most time there. A lot of my family lives around there, and it was a decent place. Nowhere I ever want to move back to, but good childhood. As far as yeah, so I would be amiss to not name my dad as one of my heroes, right? So growing up, he just, always impressed me with his work ethic. Holding down, a full-time job. He was, working shift work at a hospital, constantly bouncing back from days to nights, while, still being able to get out and be at all my little league games, be there for me. I was a baseball pitcher, so he would, I don't know how many times we spent in the backyard, him catching for me. He became a professional catcher. He had all the equipment and stuff. You get hit so many times in the shoulders and in the groin and in the face from my wild pitches. You eventually start buying all the equipment. So he spent countless days and hours, catching for me, making me a better pitcher, as well as just supporting me. I played 4 season baseball, so normal season, summer ball, fall ball, winter ball inside. We used to play inside a cow palace, they called it, because it was too cold, too snowy outside to do anything else. But we'd be in this big hangar like a building for cows, and they had a little baseball field in there. So just support me my whole life, and other than that, he can just do anything. There's nothing that scares him off. Whether it's a project around the house or working on something in his car or building something he's never built before, he's just going to go all in and do it. And generally pretty successful in doing it. So no project scares him away. Whenever he gets a quote for somebody to do something for him, he's like, nah, that's too much. I'll do it myself, and he'll just figure out how to do it. So he's always impressed me to not steer away from anything that would normally scare away the normal person to try to get off and do it. And I think that's a great trait, that he's just willing to jump into anything and just try it. I've tried to live my life based on that as well. But I can't be as successful as him in many of those things. But other than that, heroes. I think heroes are dramatized a lot in Hollywood. That's where a lot of us, understand where we fall in love with heroism and where they came from. And unfortunately, a lot of the times it's just fiction, right? And I'm sure you've heard the term, like, you never want to meet your heroes, because all these people you hear about in real life who are supposedly these grand heroes, something always comes out that they're really some scumbag. Something happened, like a firefighter running into the burning building, or insert any story there. The ones you hear on the news just very briefly, you never hear their names, you never hear anything else about them, you never hear the follow up to what happened. But that short minute of bravery, or however long it was, when somebody just makes that snap decision, that fight or flight, right? I'm getting paid for this, sure, it's my job to do this, yes, but how many times has that failed, that somebody is not going to put that risk ahead of themselves? Those selfless acts of bravery that happen on a daily basis, that you never really hear about past quick headline on the news. Those types of people are the ones who make that sacrifice against life and limb to jump in there and do it, not just because it's their job, but because they were shepherded into that job by some sort of selfless behavior, right? For many people, first responders, military, it's a paycheck, right? We're all here collecting money, we're all here supporting our families, but there are those people within those communities who have that mindset, the sheepdog and the sheep, who are, when push comes to shove, are going to make that giant leap forward at their own expense to attempt to do something heroic, not because they're looking for a medal or anything. It's just because that's what they've been trained to do, and that's the mindset they have. So those type of people are always my heroes. If we wanted to get historic or theatric Hollywood with it, man, the Band of Brothers tribe, those guys, Dick Winters, I would say those are probably my military heroes. One, because it's an amazing series, and the leadership lessons alone that you can derive from that, go far and beyond a lot of textbook stuff. Just watching that, great representation of them. I've used it day to day, just talking about leadership lessons. But the other great thing is those guys are all dead, and no one ever published anything bad about them. So there's no negative lessons that you can get from a guy like Dick Winters. So I like using them as an example, just because no one could sell to him at this point. He wasn't around for social media.
I've never seen Band of Brothers. I'll jump in really quick.
Yeah.
I've never seen Band of Brothers, unfortunately. I'm about to watch it once my son gets a little bit older, because I think he'll learn a lot from it as well, and he loves his military documentaries. I think I just saw it on, I think I'm in Netflix, so I might be able to jump on it there and check it out. But I've heard a lot of good things about it, and I've just been diving into a lot of the history stuff too, reading about Winston Churchill and Napoleon, and it's great to see, some of just, other views of the world wars that we've went through, and some of the people who did some great things during them. But yeah, with that being further ado, I'll let you jump into your hardship.
Yeah, and yeah, just let me give Band of Brothers one more plug, man. I can't believe that you haven't seen that. You have got to watch it. And yeah, I believe it is on Netflix. I watched it again probably for the 15th time or so when I saw it pop up on there. So I would watch Band of Brothers first, and then dive right into the Pacific, which is kind of it's not a sequel. It's just the next.
I saw that on there.
Yeah. I have not gotten to Masters of the Air yet, which is the newest one. Decades later. I think it's on Apple TV. I haven't jumped in on that yet, but I've got that as well. But yeah, hardship, man. Let me check your card here real quick. You were 0702 winter class, right?
I was the 0701 summer class.
Okay, 0701 summer class. All right, got you. Yeah, so my hardship I'm going to claim was my winter class 0802, and for your listeners, we're talking about SERE Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. So I was a city kid. I had no previous survival training. My outdoorsiness was limited to playing in the woods with my friends, maybe a little bit of paintball, but I was never a big outdoors guy going on camping trips or fishing or hiking through mountains or doing any of that stuff. I just didn't have a ton of experience with it. I was mostly a sports kid growing up. So I decided I was going to join the Air Force and got picked up to go to delayed entry, guaranteed job into SERE, which is something that my recruiter sold me as being super cool. So I was trying to prepare as best as I could for it. So I still remember this. I emailed the cadre at selection because they were the point of contact on the really crappy website that SERE had back then. Asked them what can I do to prepare. I kind of gave them my background, what I think I should be doing, and asked them what would be some preparation tips for me to jump right into this. And all I got back was a three-word response. It was lots of PT. So, I took that to heart, and I did lots of PT. But as we both know, that is not necessarily going to prepare you for the perils of survival, right? So getting into SERE, I came in right after summer classes started. So I think summer class started probably 1 July. I got there after July 4th. So I was in the long wait to go into the next winter class in January, which, that 6 months of my life right there are some of the best I ever had, being on what was called pre-team at that time. It's probably changed names many times since then, but the brotherhood we fostered there on pre-team through our tribulations of just getting kicked in the balls all day, every day by the, and I'll keep all names out of this because I don't want to throw them out there, but we had a cadre member who was just dead set on making us suffer, but in a good way. Suffer to grow, we'll call it. And we just got handed it to us day in and day out. And I was there through all of it, through the whole 6 months, and I think that really got me prepared as much as I could. But it still didn't prepare me for jumping into the winter in January up in the northern mountains there. So PT wise, I was still feeling great about it. I felt strong. We did a lot of rucking. I felt strong. We got to dabble a tiny bit in snowshoeing, and I was like, ooh, this is weird. I don't know how good I'm going to do at this. I was a heavy guy, carrying 100-pound ruck through winter team. I already weighed probably 220 at the time. So carrying 300 plus pounds on snowshoes with, some weak underbrush, and we'll get to that in a second here, but it didn't go too well for me. So, I got prepared as I could. We learned, all the baseline survival stuff, building shelters, building fires and whatnot on pre-team. And I was feeling way better than I was before, but I still really didn't know what was coming, right? So, first week we get in there and we do the sleep deprivation training. Do the all of the sewing and the improvising on top of all the academic classes and everything. And man, that slapped me right in the face. I don't think there was a day, it was probably 8, 10 days long, but I don't think there was a day there where I got more than 45 minutes of sleep, if that. So going through that was the first kick, and then you went right from there out to familiarization, and we got off the bus, and I don't know if you remember this winter being out in the field flights. It was January of 2008, and we had just got dumped in Spokane like 8 feet of snow, and up in the mountains it was even more. There's probably 12, 15 foot base of snow out there that we were dealing with, and at that time, January 3rd, I think was our first day. No, January 3rd is when we started Impro. So it was the second week of January when we went out to FAM. It was negative 15 degrees at night with highs of 0 during the day. So it was, immediate shockwave of being out there in the elements for the next 10 days on FAM, where we didn't get above, 5, 10 degrees the entire time. And they had all of the safety protocols for us. They would bring us back to the fire circle, for at least 10 minutes of every hour to warm up our fingers and toes if we needed it. But, and that was only during the day, right? That was during while the instructors were there. After they would leave and give us, an unbelievable amount of assignments that we needed to accomplish before the next morning, we did what we had to do out there in the cold. But it was miserable, man. It was tough. And that was the first kind of slap I felt right across the face. I tell the story a lot. One of the worst moments in my life, and this is probably still number one. We had just finished up, or we called it quits for night for doing those assignments because we needed to get sleep. We probably had to wake up in an hour or an hour and a half or something like that. And we went into our shelter, and I, climbed into my frozen sleeping bag, took off my boots, and just got into a rest position on top of, whatever stupid pine bough bed I had made for the night, and fell asleep immediately. Granted, we'll say I had 90 minutes that I was able to sleep. 45 minutes into it, I wake up because I got to pee really bad. Of course, because you're drinking water all day, every day, right? So my sleep's already interrupted by having to pee, and I just hear that wind whistling outside, and I do not want to get out of my sleeping bag. And I fight it for, 5 minutes or so. And then I realized, like, I'm going to stay awake the whole time here, or I can get up, go pee, get back in my bed, maybe get another 20 minutes of sleep. So that's what I end up doing. I get out of my sleeping bag. I open the little parachute flap to the shelter, and I jump outside, and the snow is just blowing sideways. It's, whatever, negative 15 degrees outside. I'm in my Sophie shorts and a t-shirt or whatever I went to sleep in. And I'm pissing into the wind. It's just blowing off everywhere. And I'm just sitting there shivering, probably another minute, fall dead to exposure. But getting up out of that sleeping bag to go pee out into a blizzard, and, just to get back into the sleeping bag to sleep for 20 more minutes, it was the most miserable moment of my life. If not the top, it's up there in the top 3 for sure. It's something I'll never forget. But we got through it. Somehow we lost, many people in FAM, and somehow I snaked by and got through. But then it was just on to the next one, man. Right after FAM was land navigation, mobile, right? And this is luckily in FAM, there wasn't a lot of snowshoeing that we had to do. We were in and around camp, but really not too much outside of there. So land navigation, mobile phase was my first time having to put those snowshoes on for real and start breaking brush with them. And man, I got so jacked up on mobile. Firstly, going back to, weighing 300 plus pounds with that ruck on, having 8 to 10 feet of snow, it's covering up all of that underbrush, right? So every time I would step on top of a, new growth pine tree or something like that, all the snow would just collapse underneath me, and I'd go tumbling down into this hole. And I joke you not, Manny, that probably happened to me 200 plus times in 8 days, that I would have to be fished out of a hole by the rest of my team. And you know how it is wearing a ruck, man. Like, it's hard to get up in the snow. So I'm constantly, I would watch the light guys walk right over something in front of me. Then I take one more step and boom, I'm down in the hole again, right? So much so that the team was getting so frustrated with me that I couldn't walk like the rest of them. And it went on and on like that. And then I remember we were late to get into camp. It was getting dark, and whoever our instructor was at the time was like, "Hey, we're gonna haul ass. We're gonna get down this hill." So everybody starts prancing down the hill on their snowshoes like ballerinas, and all of a sudden, I go down into a hole again, and everybody just leaves me because they don't know that I'm in a hole anymore. So I got to take my ruck off myself, throw it up into the snow, get it back on, and by the time I get up, everybody's gone. I've got to throw my headlamp on now because it's dark outside, and I start walking down this hill, following the snowshoe tracks. Right, so I'm doing my best to follow snowshoe tracks, kind of stop, look, and listen, trying to figure out where everybody is, and they're just gone, man. Smoke, they're out of there. So I get to a fork in the road where snowshoe tracks just split in all directions, and I'm like, all right, pick one. So I picked this one snowshoe track, and I start following it, and at this point I'm so overheated that I end up taking off my ruck again. I take off my top, throw it into my bag, put my ruck back on. So I'm going, it's probably 30 degrees outside because it warmed up a little bit for mobile, but completely soaked in sweat in my t-shirt, hauling ass down this mountain, following snowshoe tracks that I don't even know are the right ones, with my headlamp on. It's getting super dark at this point, and I run into this giant mound of snow. I'm like, what the hell is this thing? So I start climbing up this giant mound of snow and then fall over the top because it's the road where the snowplow pushed up all the snow onto it. So I come tumbling down this this mound of snow with a t-shirt on, middle of nowhere, right? And I get up with my headlamp, and I ran into an element from Charlie Flight who was in field training. And the instructor looked at me, and he's like looking around. He's like, "Who the hell are you?" I was like, and all the students are looking at me because I'm in a t-shirt. They're all bundled up in their fat boy clothes and whatnot. They're out there doing night navigation, and they're looking at me, and I'm like, I'm an SST. I lost my instructor. Like, do you know which way they went? And he just points down the road. We'll call it north. Doesn't say a word. So I just take off hauling ass down there. And eventually, as I'm running down the road, my instructor comes running back up the road because he realizes I'm missing, which is a big deal for them, right? They left some student behind. So we link up, and it was basically like, we're never going to talk about this. He brings me into camp, but I wish it got better from there, but it didn't, because as the days went on, I ended up my rucksack broke. It was those old Alice ones, and my strap broke. So I ended up having to just tie the strap together. So I was never really able to cinch it tight anymore or anything like that. So it started really dragging on the lower back. I would try to like tuck my uniform top into your pants, and you know that trick, right? But it would eventually just pull that up, and I would get like metal on skin contact from the Alice frame into my lower back. And on top of that, my feet, I developed trench foot while we were there because my feet were just always constantly wet. So both of those things, just got worse and worse over the last couple of days until finally, we're just, death hiking through the mountains again. And some flight doc had joined us just for funsies. He came out to the field for a little hoorah for himself. And he ends up walking behind me, and he could see this happening to my back. See the frame just dragging up onto me. He's like, hey, Airman, hey, stop for a second. And I'm like, yeah, what's up? He's like, let me take a look at your back. So he like lifts up my shirt, and he's like, ooh. He's like, that's not looking too good. He's like, when we get back to camp, like I want to take a look at that. And I'm like, all right, sounds good. So we make it through the rest of the day. We get back to camp, and he looks at my back, and he's like, this is pretty bad, man. He's like, is there anything else wrong? I was like, maybe you should take a look at my feet too. So he has me sit down and take off my boots and my socks, and he gets one look at those things, and he's like, oh no. He's like, this is bad. This is really bad. He's like, you have immersion foot. Like we need to treat this immediately. So he ends up putting me on a snowmobile with him, and we take off back to Ruby CP, and he ends up having to do like triage on my feet. He pulls out a scalpel. He's cutting off all sorts of dead skin, and he wraps them up. He bandages up my back with this huge bandage wrapped around my stomach. So, I look like a World War II casualty. And I'm thinking, this is day 7 of 8 now of mobile. We'll call it day 7 of 8. I don't remember how long it was. So in my mind, I'm like, all right, they're just going to pull me from training. And since I completed 80% or more, I'm going to be good. He's like, so I was like, I'm going to have a good night right now. I'm going to sleep out in the warm shed. I'm going to have MRE. And once he let me warm up a little bit, he's like, all right, we're gonna insert you back into training. And I was like, insert me back. He's like, yeah, you're good to go. I was like, all right, man, sounds good, doc. So he snowmobiles my ass right back out there and dumps me back at the overnight camp. And then we climbed Cougar Mountain the next day. If you remember that one, it was wasn't a super tall mountain, but it was steep getting up there. So we basically had to snowshoe staircase the entire way up, which was just miserable again. But we got through it. I ended up graduating from mobile phase as well. I limped out of there for sure. And then went on, we kept going through training. It didn't stop. You got the weekend off. It was probably the best weekend of my life. We went down to Jack and Dan's and had some pizza and some beers or whatever, but it was right back into it that next Monday. And then, I remember from there, it got a little bit better. I think teaching test was probably next, and that wasn't too bad. I think we did rock somewhere over there, and that was kind of a fun phase. But once we got into tropics and coastal again, that's where it got real shitty for me again. It rained, of course, rained every single day. Every single day it was just pouring rain. And again, I'll throw this one back into my top 3 most horrible moments in my life. It was jungle phase, which, rainforest, Pacific Northwest, whatever you want to call it. We were building the unsupported platform sleeping shelter, right? So you had to use kind of those Y logs to support, counterbalance them. Yep. And then you're just using, whatever else wood you could find and cut into making a A-frame kind of sleeping platform. And no 550 cord at all, nothing else to help support it. No other help other than those Y frames. So of course I'm a big guy. You probably can't tell from here, but I'm 6'5". So I make this thing way too small already, because the smaller it is, the easier it is, right? So I probably half-assed that, make a smaller platform than I want to. And then I'm sleeping on that thing. I think they let us we couldn't use a poncho. It was another dickhead cadre. I'm not going to name his name, but he wouldn't let us use a poncho for like an overhead shelter, but they let us use an EVC. And if you don't know what an EVC is for your listeners, it's just a waterproof mat. Maybe 4 feet by 4 feet. It's not that big, but so they let us use that.
About that.
Yeah. So we finally go to bed, and of course it's just downpouring rain in the rainforest. Right? Check. And I must have shipped my body weight in the middle of the night, because that whole thing just collapsed on me. And I go barreling down the 3 or 4 feet that we had built it up, just down into a pile of sticks, mud, and rain. And I wake up on the ground, arms, legs spread eagle, just rain pouring on my face, just like, okay, this is another just great time of my life right now. Luckily I didn't break my back or anything or get stabbed by a stick, but I'm just laying there in the mud, in the rain. And I think I looked at my watch, and it was like 1 or 2 in the morning. So I knew there was going to be no rebuilding this shelter in the middle of the night in the pouring rain. So I had to figure out what I was going to do. I couldn't go share somebody else's shelter because they were all just one man's, right? So I came up with the bright idea just to go over to the fire circle where we had the parachute up, and I just slept in the mud in the fire circle for the next couple of hours. Just woke up completely covered in mud, face covered in mud. People wandered into the fire circle like, what the hell are you doing in here? Don't want to talk about it. So just another great moment in my life there. But yeah, still continued on, right, man? Just kept going. And then I remember, one of my last most horrible moments in training was, it must have been coastal. Yeah, it's probably coastal or rivers or something like that, where I got tasked with one other guy to carry the Zodiac boat back to camp, which should have been like a 4 or 5 man team to do it. It was 2 of us, right? And we're carrying this, fully inflated Zodiac back to camp, which of course is, up a big ass sandy hill. And of course it's pouring rain again. And we're trying to get it up this kind of last stint of steep incline to get up to where our camp was kind of on a little hilltop. and we just keep slipping down in the mud and falling down and tumbling back to the bottom of that hill. And we tried it like 2 or 3 times to get up there. And finally we tumble back down the third time. And I just look at the guy that I was with and I'm like, what are we doing, man? Like, what's the point of all of this? You know? And I was like, should we quit? Should we just quit right now? And he said, no, man, let's not quit. I was like, all right, we're not gonna quit. And that's all it took, you know. I just needed a little reaffirmation there to get us going. And you know, I think we just abandoned the boat there at the bottom of the hill, and we were like, when we get everybody else, we'll get this thing up here. You know, because they were doing whatever other bullshit tax they were doing back down at the coast or the river. I forget where we were, but it was just falling down the hill in the mud and the pouring rain again. And it was just rinse and repeat, you know. That entire winter class was miserable for me. But I just kept getting through it and just riding the wave, right? I had no idea what I was doing the whole time. I was just trying to ride the wave and keep my head above the water. Whereas, you know, I watched other people thrive. You know, I was the guy just constantly, you know, doggy paddling and trying to breathe in a lot of these situations. But, you know, it was just that intestinal fortitude, I guess, that you know, I kind of instilled in myself through that pre-team and through other life lessons that I just kept going. I wasn't gonna quit, at least I would tell myself I wasn't gonna quit, and just kept going and kept going. And then, you know, finally one day came and we graduated, man. And you know what the crazy thing is? I got distinguished graduate out of all of that. having struggled as much as I did, I think it was me and the team leader got distinguished graduate. But what probably saved me was, you know, I'm a decently book smart guy, so I'm sure a lot of your DG stuff is weighted on your academic tests that you had to take. Yeah. I'm sure my scores were always pretty good, and the rest of it was enough to scrape by. And you know, maybe the cadre, you know, liked my attitude. I don't know, you know, and I'm sure there's a lot of different weight that goes into that. But I was shocked as anyone to get distinguished graduate that day on graduation. But because that whole thing was a hardship for me. You know, it was there wasn't not a minute that was, you know, necessarily easy about it. And you know, I think, you know, fast forward to the future, when I went through Ranger School as a summer class, dude, like I would never say Ranger School was easy, but man, I had a much better time in Ranger School in the summer. But yeah, that's my hardship story, man. I'm sure there's a lot more to dissect in there and more horrible moments I had during that period, like eating raw mussels and gooey ducks and things like that made me throw up, you know. But we don't have to get into that.
Now, I'll cover a few things for those listening that I took away. I had the exact opposite experience of you going through SERE. I joined when I enlisted, and then I got to Fairchild, and like I went straight through SV80. Then the week later, I started team, so I had no pre-team. I was the last pre-team class. I was pretty similar to you. I grew up not a lot of like country background, even though I was from the country per se, Northern California, but nothing to the survival requirements of SERE. I didn't know what to expect. Obviously, being a summer class, there was just a lot more movement for us, a lot longer days because we had the time. For me, it was pretty similar to you, man, just grind. I remember doing exactly what you said, just don't quit, just don't quit, just don't quit. You know, I saw a lot of people quit. I saw a lot of, you know, I had pretty good, I say, mentors during my team because I was the second youngest on my team. So right out of high school, from a small bubble town. So I really latched on to like the forays and the knights and the pitchers who were older and had families. And so I used them as sort of like my guidance and sort of somebody I could talk to. But for me, it was really just don't quit. Be the gray man. I say, like, for those listening, the gray man is a decent leadership skill if you're trying to get through something, but if you don't want to thrive. When I'm getting through SERE, I just had to get through. You know, like that's, you know, that was all tech school was for me, just graduate. Get through the tech school and graduate, and I did, and I loved it. And so, yeah, I had pretty similar experiences. I had like an injury I didn't look at, and it got pretty bad when the docs looked at it. Coastal was the worst for me because I was thrown up in the 20-man life raft the whole time on the ocean. So it was just miserable, like to where I wasn't even helpful. I was just a useless body taking space on the raft, just throwing up. So I thought I thought I was gonna get kicked out because I was like, I'm not doing anything. So like, if they're grading me, like I'm just like a lump. But I just kept going through and kept doing that. So it's always great to hear just the perspectives. For those listening, SERE isn't horrible. It's, it's a great experience because there's nowhere else you're going to be able to learn to survive in all the biomes possible. And then you go on and teach air crew. And as a young airman in the military, for those listening in the Air Force, SERE is a dedicated MOS or AFSC. So that's our primary job. We're trained and we do that as a career. In the Army and the Navy, it's an additional duty. So like those people sign on to go teach the SERE school and then go back to their MOS. So they have different experiences and it's not their passion, like we grew up with a passion after to really teach and thrive. And obviously it's sort of coming back on you, moving back into the AATC world, working with ROTC. But really quick, let's dive into your career. You do your enlisted time, you decide to get out, join the dark side like me. You go down the aviator route as well. So we have that great connection and bond. So talk about some ways for people listening. What did you learn being prior E? How did you apply it to an officer? What have you learned? There's a lot of questions I have, but I want to hear what you want to throw in there.
Yeah, for sure. Just to kind of let you know how my process worked. I know you went, you got out and went to ROTC. And finished up your degree to go that way. I already had my degree. I had finished my bachelor's degree before I came enlisted. So I was sitting my first 7 years with my bachelor's degree, and I had started applying for OTS in 2013 and 2014. But if you remember back then, it was government shutdown, sequestration. They kept canceling all the OTS boards over and over again. So I had known it was going to be in my cards to try to commission from very early on. I originally wanted to be an OSI officer just because special agent sounded kind of cool to me.
Yeah.
So those first couple boards that I put in for OSI, and they got canceled. Finally, when the board stood back up in, I guess it was mid 2014, they're like, "Hey, big announcement! It's going to be a rated only board." Jobs being RPA, Air Battle Manager, CISO. And I knew kind of the flavor of Air Battle Manager and CISO from being a SERE instructor and talking to those guys through the last couple of years, but I didn't really know anything about RPA. And subsequently, one of our other SERE guys had just left. He got picked up for RPA the year before. So I kind of just took out the Rolodex and tried to figure out who I knew in that world. And I got in contact. I think our DO or ADO at the time, his brother was a RPA pilot. So I ended up getting a call with him and kind of just learned about the community. And I was like, hey, that doesn't sound too bad. You show up to work, shoot a couple missiles, go home, come back the next day, do it again. It's like I could probably get on board with that. So I ended up putting it as my number one. I think CISO number 2 and Air Battle Manager is my number 3. And little did I know that if you were, living and breathing, and you could pass your flying class physical back in 2014, in the height of all of the wars going on, that you were shooing for an RPA pilot. So I got this all happened really quick, right? So I applied for that board. Board closure was September. Results came out in October, and I got a call saying I had been picked up for RPA. And then they were going to send me to OTS in November. So this was like,
holy crap.
Yeah. So put the board in September, results October. They were going to send me in November. The only thing that prevented that from happening was it was at the end of the fiscal year, and they had no money to send me to IFC to go get my, whatever physical done at right now, right? So I got a call back like the next, and then this is me mentally preparing. Like, oh my God, I'm about to get OTS right now. Like, I got a whole life. I had a new kid at the time. It's major disruption in life, right? Like I'm about to PCS here with 4 weeks notice. So the only thing that saved me was the Air Force ran out of money, and so I get the call back. They're like, "Hey, you're not going in November, but you're going to be going in January 2 start date." So I was in the first class of January for OTS. So still, find out in October, and I'm gone in 3 months off to OTS, scramble to get my life together for all of that. and then obviously OTS, was it was kind of a funny time for me. Your experience, as I'm seeing, differed greatly in ROTC than OTS. OTS is kind of like Air Force basic training, uh, light or diet Air Force basic training, I guess. It was very strange for me, kind of jumping back into that world, to have the military training instructors yelling at you. And when, like, I really, I've been in ATC and SERE. I know what you can do and you can't do. Like, you're not going to scare me, man. I just worked at resistance training for 4 years. So, they had to deal with me and I had to deal with them. But ultimately it was like being in a college course. After the first couple of weeks, it wasn't too devastating for anybody, whether you were right off the street going through, or you were, a seasoned, prior enlisted guy, which there were a lot of. We were the first, what do they call it? T5, total force officer training. So they combined us, the National Guard, and the Air Force Reserve all into one class. And most of the guardsmen were all prior E. So there was a ton of prior E, people in there who were able to kind of step up and guide the people who hadn't been there. But man, I just couldn't believe it, dude. 60 days in and out, and boom, I'm second lieutenant. I was like, that was it. That was all we did.
That's crazy. Took me 4 years.
Yeah. That's why I like to think it's the best route, 60 days, right? You don't suffer 4 years at the academy. You don't have to go 4 years at ROTC. 60 days, butter bar. But it was all rapid succession, man. I was in and out from NCO to lieutenant in less than 5 months from finding out, or something crazy like that. So, but my prior enlisted time in being a SERE NCO, and I got to fulfill a lot of good leadership positions while I was in there. So at resistance training, our flight chief left for whatever reason, and as a staff sergeant, I was the flight chief of our flight in resistance training. And then I got to go back to, once I had put in my package for OTS, I left RT to go back to field flights, into Bravo. So I got to be an ops NCO in field flights, which, being an NCO in the field flights is so much more fun than being an airman in the field flights. It was probably the best, 6 months of my life. I think I was there. I loved being back in field training as an NCO. It was tons of fun but then you got a motley crew of 30 airmen that you're carrying around, on top of all of the students as well. So I had gotten to develop a lot of those leadership skills and traits, and figuring out what works and what doesn't work with different people, and bringing that into OTS, and being able to, convey to somebody who's like brand new, has no idea what's going on, doesn't even know, what the position of attention is, or what they're supposed to be doing here, where we're going, or what we're doing. They're just constantly flailing fish, right? And being able to calm them down, because this is the most stressful thing that they've ever experienced in their entire life, because they were, sheltered growing up and whatnot. And some man yelling at you is the worst thing that's ever happened. And, me, not just me, but me and, the other people who were there, who had a little bit of experience, were able to kind of, it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. This is, not a big deal. So, a lot of it did carry over. And then what shocked me is, especially going into the aviation world, and you could probably, maybe agree with this, is it was a long time before I really had any responsibility. Being a second lieutenant and a first lieutenant, like, you really just got to worry about yourself. Nobody trusted me to do anything aside from making popcorn, right? It wasn't really until I was a captain that, okay, now you need to lead these people. But it was just weird coming from me, from ops NCO flight chief roles to, I didn't do any real sort of like formal, we'll call it formal leading, right? Until later on. Obviously, you don't have to be a leader to lead, right? Or you don't have to be in a leadership position to lead. And I tried to do that a lot especially with, the young lieutenants who were the new guys. Because I was always ahead of the game. And I found my junior CGO years very, very successful, just because I knew, there's a game to play in the Air Force, right? And I knew how to play that game where other people didn't, because they didn't have 8 years in already. So I was able to climb the ladder, or the totem pole, or whatever you want to call it, very, very quickly as a young lieutenant, and kind of just jump ahead of my peers. While still trying to instill that on them is like, hey, you're mad because they're not making you an instructor. I get it, but like, here's what you need to do for that to happen, right? You're mad because you're not getting to do this thing that you want to do. Is like, have you asked anybody? Like, have you done these basic things to make it known that this is what you want? Because being the gray man doesn't work all the time. If you're the gray man, people aren't going to notice you, and they're not going to give you what you want. So, just instilling like, hey, step one, make it known that you want to do this like thing. And a lot of the time, that's all it takes, is because most people are lazy and they don't want to do things that are extra to their job. So the fact that you're volunteering to do something or showing interest is going to go a long way.
Yeah, man, there's a lot of great stuff you said there. Shoot, I'm going to try to go backwards to the beginning where you started. I love how you talked about, and there isn't a lot of leadership jobs per se, like you said, as a young aviator, which is why I love the discussion of like, it's always great when I get to meet other leaders in the Air Force and they're from like LRS or maintenance, and FSS. They've been leading hundreds of airmen since they were lieutenant. So it's always great to have those discussions with them and let them know what we do on the ops side. And one of my key traits, I always tell a lot of people that the officers in the ops world bring, when it's not leading a lot of people, it's how we learn to debrief and make decisions in stressful situations. That's usually the big impact and differences I've seen in our leadership skills being an aviator than those who were like a maintenance officer who may understand like managing and leading people, but they, like when you're an aviator, you're definitely put in stressful situations. You have to lead on your own. You develop a lot more peer leadership as well.
Yeah.
Just like you saw, like, and when you take advantage of peer leadership, you can move up a lot more. So I definitely saw a lot of that. And I love how you mentioned your leadership changed with the people you were with. That's like, man, I didn't see that until I became a captain. And I was very blinded by the B1 fraternity world when I became a young guy, like going from SERE to ROTC to B1, it was like 3 fraternities in a row, man. Like SERE's a small brotherhood. That was like my college life, right? Partying, doing that stuff. College ROTC was weird. It was like professional, but then I was doing rugby and football. So there was like that life. And then going into the B1, man, that was like straight fraternity. Like I jumped very heavily into the fraternity side of it, I wanted to be a bro. I loved that aspect of it. I had other prior enlisted guys with me in my naming class. I had some other FAPEs. So we had a very experienced crew where I was sort of like the younger person again when it came to experience in aviation.
Yeah.
And so what I brought was, I don't know, man, I didn't do well as a leader, as a young lieutenant, because I was very much just focused on the B1 lifestyle, doing the flying, going on the deployments and TDYs. I stepped out of my comfort zone when I became a captain at a younger captain level when I became a flight commander. So that's where I really put my prior enlisted skills to use, was when I stepped out, became a young AFEO as a young captain outside of the flying squadron, and then sort of developed my leadership on that path. And that's the path that really led me here, was going away from flying, focusing on leadership, development, myself, and then helping others. And so, yeah, and then for those listening, right, ROTC is a 4-year path to become an officer. But I loved it because I didn't have the college one, so I couldn't do OTS. I didn't want to get college when I was in the military because I'm not a huge fan of it still, because I'd rather just have somebody like, hey, if you're going to do college, go do college. If you have it, go do OTS. And so there's that there. And then in ROTC, I didn't start leading until like my junior and senior year. Because my freshman and sophomore year, I was doing football, I was doing rugby. So my commander was like very much like, hey, you're prior enlisted, you're doing football, just come to the ROTC class, don't get hurt, and you'll commission. I was like, cool, sweet. No worry there. So I definitely had to pick and choose my time to lead and excel. But I like how you talked about that. And it is crazy, man. Enlisted officer in 5 months, that's you don't see that a lot, I think, now with OTS. It's almost like a year sometimes for them to wait to get selected, to get picked up, and then to go to their slot.
Or even longer from what I've heard, especially if you're trying to come off the street. Like if you're not prior enlisted, some of those guys are waiting 2 years to get slotted.
Couple quick questions as you transition to this ROTC route. What are you looking for in these young officers, for those listening, or young leaders? What do you want to try to instill on them? What are you going to bring to Det 905, man? That's my alma mater, man. I want the best there. I want to see some good cadets. What are you going to bring them?
Yeah. So, I mean, coming from my last assignment, I was at the schoolhouse, right? So I was getting a lot of these ROTC graduates who were on their first, instructional IQT path. So I kind of saw the end product of what we were getting, right? And the ones who always excelled more were the ones who were able to kind of control that military professionalism in that, in that environment where, like, hey, we're instructor student, right? Like, I'm trying to train you to do your job, you know, at the first step. Now you still got to go to the second step, third step, the fourth step before you're going to be operational. So it's important to me to make sure that they have that, military mindset that, like, hey, college is over. You're entering the real world now, right? So now we're kind of going back in time. I'm getting them. I'm going to be teaching freshmen. So this is going to be wild to me. It's going to be very, very unique experience, I think, because I haven't had to, other than my enlisted counterparts who were at the schoolhouse as well. They were 18, 19 years old, but I didn't do any like primary instruction with them. I was kind of just oversight. But yeah, so it's gonna be weird, man. Fresh going back to college, right? Dealing with these 18-year-olds. What am I looking for? Just the basics, man. Like, be there, right? Like, show up. That's what we want. Like, the Air Force doesn't need you, right? I think that's what they need to understand is we're not having the same recruiting problems as the rest of the military. People are lining up to become an Air Force officer. So what I want to see is motivation, right? Like, show me you want to be here and you want this to be your career, and show me why, right? We don't owe you anything. We're, maybe when we go to war with China, we're gonna be a lot more desperate and start onboarding as many people as we possibly can. But right now we're doing great, and you need to convince me why I should hire you to be a military officer. I don't need to entice you with scholarships or hold your hand or do this and that. Like, you're already getting a good gig. You're coming out of a 4-year college with a guaranteed job on the other end. That's already a pretty good deal. But if you can show that motivation, show that stick-to-itiveness, show that leadership at that young age, that's where these cadets are going to excel, in my opinion. Like, I am, just like any other job I've ever had, is I want to work with motivated people. I want to work with people who want to be there, not somebody who's there because, I'm in it for the college scholarship, or I'm in it because my dad was in the Air Force, or I'm in it because, I need health benefits for my family or whatever. Those are all great things. And not everybody wants to serve your country because you're a patriot, right? I get that. And I would never steer anyone away from the military who wants to join for health benefits or whatnot. It's a job. At the end of the day, it's still a job. But where you're going to excel, right? Because you're always going to have your top third, middle third, bottom third, right? Where you're going to excel in that top third is those people who are motivated for whatever reason, who are going above and beyond, leading their peers, helping their peers to help get them to the end, because nobody's going to get through on your own, right? Like, there's a couple things you can control. You can control your own GPA. You can control your own physical fitness scores, but you can't control your leadership skills on your own, right? Because you have to trust your team, and your team needs to trust you, and you need to show that you can work together despite whatever adversity that you may have. Because you may not like the people who are on whatever team that you've been assigned to, but you sure as hell have to work with them and find success. Otherwise, everybody fails, right? And that's what, as cadre, that we're going to be looking for is leading, when everybody doesn't want to be there, right? At 6 a.m. in the snow, when everybody's tired and cold and hungry, but it's your leadership, position, and you need to show up, and you need to get people to do whatever it is they're doing for the day. So that motivation, man, I guess back to your original question, what am I looking for? I'm just looking for motivation. I don't think it's asking a lot, right? You're already, spending the money here to go to college. You think the Air Force may be for you. Show a little bit of motivation while you're there. And, I obviously look more towards the juniors and the seniors and, the contracted people for that, because, some people are dipping their toes in the water as freshmen and sophomore, and that's fine. If it's not for you, it's not for you. thanks for showing up. Thanks for playing around, and, go find something else to do. That's 100% acceptable. And I'll never hold anybody against that who it's not for you. It's not for you. That's fine. It's not for everybody. But if you're going to stick through it to the end, man, you better show motivation. You better show me why you're going to be a military officer, and what you bring to the table. Because I don't want to send any turds to the enterprise. I don't want my name to be slapped on somebody's back that said, "Who trained you? Where'd you come from?" I don't want reach back phone calls from angry lieutenant colonels who got turd lieutenant over here, right? That's what I want to avoid.
I'm just going to throw out what's great. What you just said is you covered like the rest of the script we would talk about. My leadership philosophy, lead by example in all you do. You already covered by controlling what you can control, be good at fitness, show up on time, be good at the basics, lead by example. Yeah. To be selfless, you have to be selfish. It goes in line with that. If you can work on yourself, you can help others. Build relationships based off trust and care. You just talked about helping others. You want that. The last one I have is challenge the road in front of you by getting comfortable, being uncomfortable. That may be their junior and senior year, but for what you talked about, the leadership traits I embellish, grit, you talked about grit. You didn't say grit, but you meant it, with like, hey, it's going to be hard. Just keep showing up. Control what you can control. Man, that's a huge one. And you've said it before earlier on in the episode, you're like, you can get so far, you talked about when you were a lieutenant, you can get so far ahead by just doing some extra things because everybody else is going to be lazy. So if you just do those little extra things or just the really basic things good, you'll excel. And that's one thing I try to focus on with myself and my lifestyle with my kids and a lot of the airmen I work with. When they ask me like, hey, how do I get better? I'm like, just be really good at the basics. You can be really good at the basics, like consistent at showing up on time, consistent at your grades, consistent at feedback, all these little things. In 2 or 3 years, you're going to blow past people. Instead of this route of, let me do a big thing here and get ahead, and then you sort of, you fall down a little bit, then you got to do another big thing, it's, if you just stack those bricks day by day, in the long run, you're going to see great results. You may not see them right away, but man, when you graduate, I think you'll have some really, really good lieutenants coming into the military.
Yeah, and to add on to what you were saying, one of my big philosophies is that success snowballs, right? So if you find success at one thing, that's going to open the door or open the window to the next thing that you could jump into, and then you do that, and you say you win a quarterly award, right? And now that quarterly award opens the door to do another thing, and then you win an annual award. Right now you're an annual award winner. That opens up, hey, this guy must be squared away. Let's make him an instructor ahead of his peers, right? Then you become an instructor. You do a bunch of good things as an instructor, and maybe you win another award. You put in a good package for that, or maybe they make you a flight commander ahead of your peers or something, or the next step, you find success in that. Like, hey, this guy has shown consistent quality work. Like, let's make him an evaluator ahead of his peers, right? So the early success, as long as, like you said, as long as you stay on top of it and you keep getting those wins along the way, and you don't, say, hey, I'm good for the year, right? I did this one thing, I'm good. Stay on top of that. That success snowballs all the way, to however high you want to go. I mean, that's how you get these guys who make general at 18 years or so, is because they have constantly stayed on top of the game the entire time, and they've checked all the boxes that they need to do. And I'm not advocating for that, right? Like, that sounds like a lot of work to me to be a general. I never, have the timeline to be one or really strive to do it. I try to maintain that balance of like, hey, I need my personal success to get what I want, right? Like, and what I wanted was desirable assignments and to make rank as quickly as possible. So you find that balance where, I've made it through my whole career. I've never had to be an executive officer. I don't know if you ever have, but it was just not a desire that I ever had. Not my lifestyle. Didn't want to do it, right? So I've never held a staff job. I've always been operational to one extent or another, but I was able to make that work where a lot of people can't. And that was, just by snowballing that success as much as I can.
One thing you mentioned, though, is even if those people aren't looking for the general, to keep working hard, at least you have it there later on down the road if you want to do it, like you don't throw it off the table early on. And that's what I love about your concept and your philosophy. You're like, hey, man, I may not want to get there, but I know if I just keep doing what I can now, if I have to, or if the opportunity comes up, like, I can do it. Like, that's pretty cool, to be like, hey, I may have the opportunity to go down that path if I want to. And so that's why I tell so many airmen, I'm like, yo, you should be thinking of commissioning regardless, even if you don't want to commission, because it's already going to put you on a trajectory above your peers. Because later on down the road, let's say you start now and you don't want to, but you do some college. And then in the back of your mind is there. When you finish your degree 4 years ago or whatever, and you didn't want to, then you're like, oh, well, at least I got it done. Maybe I can commit. You have the opportunity. And so I tell so many airmen, because I get a lot of feedback on my social media where people are like, oh, we need chiefs or we need that. And I'm like, yes, we do. But those chiefs probably got there because they had bigger goals than chief, or other things that were helping them get there. And I bet you when they got to chief, they could still become an officer if they want to, because they got their degree and they have the path set up. And so I love how you talk about do the small things, because it just, like you said, the snowball, and it opens up those doors too when you blow through them, right? And this snowball analogy we're using, we're going to be able to knock down bigger doors, open up other doors along the path, instead of being a smaller snowball where we're like bouncing off those big, trees or whatever that are in our way.
Yeah. And one thing that I also, helped me out along the way is recognizing that no matter what you're doing, right? I'm never going to be the best at something. There's always, for whatever reason, going to be somebody better than you out there, right? Somebody who can be a better pilot, somebody who can be a better leader, somebody who could write a better package, somebody who could do this additional duty better than you. There's always somebody who's going to be better. But what's easier to get into is just be in the top 90%, right? 10%, it's a big number. If you can constantly keep your career or your path and whatever you're doing, whether it's military, civilian life, whatever, if you could stay in the 90, you're never going to be the best, right? It's an impossible goal to strive for. Like there can only be one Michael Phelps or whatever analogy that you want to use. And maybe that's you, but it's probably not going to be you, right? So stay in that top 90%, and that will open up all of those doors that you need to. If you can't even, if that's too much for you, stay in that top third, right? Like I said before, there's always going to be a top third, there's always going to be a middle third, there's always going to be a bottom third. If you're in that top third of whatever your career is, you are always going to find at least moderate to high success, right? You may not be the first person to promote. You may not be the first person to get the job. You may not be the first person to get to go do this thing. But as long as you're in that top third, you are constantly going to be looked at, to fulfill those roles. And, that's what's going to keep you going. That's what's going to keep you advancing in whatever it is that you're doing, is by constantly striving to be a good performer. And being a good performer just comes into knowing the basics, right? Knowing the basics of the job, and then excelling at that, as well as taking on whatever other opportunities may pop up to let you be distinguished from your peers. Because ultimately that's the whole game, is what makes, Airman A better than Airman B, right? Because your commanders have to stratify you from 1 to 1,000, and what makes the top 30 people. And look for what those people are doing and learn for them and follow those paths. This military thing's been around for a while, right? It's not rocket science, and no one needs to reinvent the wheel. Just figure out what the people who have success did ahead of you, and just follow them, right? Be a good follower, and then when it's time to step up, step up.
With that being said, do you have a book that you want to throw out to people out there that they can jump on and get a good read in?
I do, man. I thought greatly about what I was going to bring in here, and I have an all-time favorite book, and it's not really a leadership book, but I think it is a book that everybody needs to read. It's called Atlas Shrugged. Have you ever heard of it? It's by Ayn Rand. It was a 1950s book about a dystopian society where essentially the government has decided to take control of pretty much everything at the expense of the business owners and the people who are controlling kind of the day to day. So it's kind of a pseudo political book. It really falls into the land of libertarianism, but that's not necessarily why I like the book. The reason I do is because you can look at the big picture of the entire thing that's going on, and it is a long read, man. It's a thick book. It's like that big. Or if you're going for the audio book, it's probably like 30 hours long. But it will keep you entertained. But I think the biggest thing that I've gotten out of that book is don't let anyone stifle your innovation. You're always going to hear people saying, no, you can't do this. You're always going to hear people saying, that's not allowed. You're always going to hear people saying, this is the way that we do things because this is the way we've done things forever, or because this is the way that we're telling you to do things. And the big theme of the book is essentially innovation is stifled, and people can no longer continue to come up with these great products or ways of doing things. So a sub society within the group decides that they're going to go off on their own and allow their innovation to be free and start their own society where they can do things without government regulation and whatnot. I really, really enjoyed the book. It is a long read, but I think that's the main theme is don't ever let anybody keep you down. If you've got a dream that you want, do everything in your power to keep it going, right? And the dream in the book is the electric engine, and that they can't get to making the electric engine because of government regulations, but that I think it applies to a lot of things. If you have some sort of dream that people are saying you can't do it because you're too old, or you're too fat, or you're too whatever it happens to be, right? Like, don't let that be the wall that stops you from achieving your dream. Just go out and figure out how you're going to do it. And it's not going to be an easy path. It never is an easy path. But when you can dig down deep and go out there and figure it out yourself, and make it happen, that's the ultimate success, right? Fulfilling your dreams. And I think that's just what that book is about. There's plenty of other books out there. I love the biographies of different generals, and I love reading biographies of politicians. I love fiction. I'm a big Stephen King fan. I've read probably every Stephen King book out there, except the new ones. I haven't gotten around to getting into those, but going back to like Under the Dome and It and all the classics. I love Stephen King. Not a lot of leadership lessons out of those, but just good reading, right? Also, big fan of the Jack Ryan series. I don't know. There's tons of stuff out there, but if you're asking me what my all-time favorite book was, it's probably Atlas Shrugged.
Okay.
What's you got a recommendation for me? I'm actually in the market for a new book.
Yeah, so this one is a very short read. I'm finding out. I usually don't do many on Kindle. I wish I'd do hardback, but I have this one on Kindle. It's called Becoming a Leader. It's just by Tom Conley. It's a Marine, I think, officer who just wrote this book for his daughter to become a better leader. And I've loved it because it's shown me the Marine side of leadership, which I really love the Army and Marines ethos behind leadership. And so I've been diving into it, and this book is really good. It's just like basic leadership stuff on how to do this, how to do that. But he's got good stories with it. It's a short read. Like, I'm already like 75% through, and I think I've only been reading it for like maybe an hour or two on my Kindle. Yeah. So pretty short. And it's just good to see leadership bounce back and forth between branches, where that's what we do, or we do this differently. How can I apply this here? And so that. And then I'm also reading Energy Bus was a good one. Just a short, simple read on the Energy Bus philosophy of you control your own destiny. You pick and choose who's on your bus and who's not on your bus, depending on what they bring to the team. So a good little book there. So those are the two I'll drop.
Yeah, I'll give you one more that I just thought of that I think is a book that everybody should read. Especially the number one stress factor in life is usually finances and money and whatnot for everybody. So if you have no idea what you're doing when it comes to investing, The Little Book on Common Sense Investing. It's a short read. It's a small one, but that will really open your eyes to how easy it is to actually successfully invest. I think the theme is mostly for just saving money in general, and that's one that anybody, regardless of your educational level, can get through and understand. There's no long jargon in there or anything. It's like, oh, that's really all I need to do, and that's what got me going on that one. But to tie it all back, I did come up with your leadership traits here that I wanted to go through. I went through 1, 2, 3, and then I added in 4, which was one of my own, but also one of yours. I just kind of changed the name a little bit. So I think the first part is 1, know the basics, right? We talked about that one already. Wherever your job is, you got to know the basics to excel. And also I want to add in there, you need to know the basics of the people underneath you, right? Because as a leader, you're not gonna necessarily always be doing the same job as everybody you're leading. So knowing at least the basics of what they're doing is huge. Two, controlling time. I really like that one that you put on your list there. I think controlling time is absolutely huge because there's a big difference between being able to successfully lead people in the hours of work that you're supposed to be operating and wasting everybody's time and making them come in early or stay late or work on their weekends or in their off time, their free time. That's the easiest way to lose respect and be hated, I think, is when you're making people work when they're supposed to be off, right? Number three, I took from your list, make decisions, right? The worst decision you can do is indecision, is how I always thought about it. So whether you're 100%, thinking you're ready to go on this decision or you're only at the 70% level, sometimes it's best just to dive in and make a decision to get the ball rolling, to get the wheels turning, right? And I tie that in with my number four. I forget how you had it worded, but one of my leadership philosophies and something that I just live my life by is that fortune favors the bold. So sometimes it is best just to dive in what you think is the right path. And if you're going to fail hard, right? And learn from your mistakes. But I truly believe that fortune favors the bold. And when you make those bold decisions and you go for that big piece of pie, that more often than not, you find the success. And I forget how you had that one worded, but I just want to throw that.
With that being said, do you have any last parting shots before we wrap it up with a quick little selfie and then we'll be on our way?
No, man, this is it's always interesting. I've never done a podcast before, and I never thought I would do one. So it was interesting for you to invite me to do this. Despite my lack of technological means around here, that I think we still got it done. So thanks for inviting me out. I love talking about stuff like this, and I love just sharing stories. It's cool. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I love having people on, because most people don't know they have a story, right? And sometimes you just got to be able to talk about it, And what was great about the podcast today is, it was a great story on what SERE is. A lot of people don't know. So it opens up their eyes there. It opens up their eyes to grit, just taking one step at a time. And I just, I wanted to reach out to you because we have similar paths. You're going back to ROTC, which I really love. And so I hope those listening who are on that path learn something. So when they show up at your door, they go, hey, I listen to your podcast. I know what I have to do to win, and I'm going to win. So, yeah. All right. Thank you for your time. We'll hang out for just a little bit after. And then for those listening, like I say all the time, if you didn't write anything down, I'm going to be disappointed. I got 2 pages of notes like I always do. So I hope you guys learned something, add something to your leadership belt. And until next time, go crush the day.